All right, everybody, welcome into the Fly Fantasy Football Podcast for a very special episode today because it is the first time we are live on the Fantrax Twitter account. And welcome back, and everybody, to the Fly Fantasy Football Podcast. If you're new to our podcast here, it is the Fantasy Football Podcast on fantraxhq.com. This is the first time we're going live on the Fantrax Twitter account, so welcome in. Obviously, we're usually audio only, but this time we had a pretty cool visual intro. As always, I am your host, Colin McTamany, at Colin_MCT on Twitter, and I am joined once again by my co-host, Sean Malone. Sean, how you doing today?
Doing well, and it's not just me joining you this time. We got another special guest here as well.
Yes, we do. As you can see, there are three of us here on camera. Introducing everybody to Nick Skrip at P2W Fantasy. He is the Fantrax NFL content lead. Nick, why don't you tell people your background in fantasy sports, what you'll be doing at Fantrax, a little bit about yourself. I know I just mentioned the Twitter handle there again, maybe plug it another time, but tell people what your favorite NFL team is, how long you've been playing fantasy sports, and what to expect from you as a part of the Fantrax team.
Sure. So first and foremost, appreciate you guys having me on this podcast. I've checked it out in the past, and I'm excited to work with you guys here at Fantrax. I've been in the space since about 2020. I think it was March where I first started off as a logo, P2W Fantasy. It was made in a Word document. It looked terrible. And I just started off from there making some articles, and it slowly progressed into a lot of different things where I began making content in different forms, doing a lot of streaming. I eventually started working with Fantasy Points, where I did a weekly show on Wednesdays, my own show, and then I did one on Sundays. That was a betting show. Scott Barrett and myself also, before the season, would have some big guests from the industry on, and went that route for a bit. Then I went my own direction and came to Fantrax here, where I thought was a really nice opportunity because I saw Fantrax as a company that did some good stuff for fantasy football, did some great stuff for fantasy baseball, and had some opportunity to really grow in the industry for fantasy football content. So Bears fan from Illinois. So it's been rough, but it's looking a little bit better in that aspect. But I'm hoping with the Fantrax gig here to collaborate with guys like yourself and other writers that are in this brand, produce tons of content via video, write-ups, articles, you name it, just, different ways to express, the content that we want to drop here, and just excited to get things rolling. So this podcast live here is an awesome way to really start the Fantrax flame here for the season.
Well, absolutely. We are very lucky to have you, Nick. Obviously, I'm familiar with your work prior to Fantrax, and I hope it makes its way into the Fantrax universe here, and we just continue to put out great content. Let's get right into the episode here of The Fly, episode 42. It's a very special episode. Obviously, we're live for the first time. There's three of us here, myself, Sean, and Nick, and we are doing Sell Me This Pen, Sell Me This Player. For those of you familiar with the movie Wolf of Wall Street, obviously, this is a scene in the movie in which Leonardo DiCaprio, the lead character there, Jordan Belfort, is trying to get together a team of stockbrokers, really scummy guys, but trying to get them to become salesmen. And he pulls out a pen from his jacket and says, "All right, you guys think you could sell anything? Sell me this pen." He goes around, "Yeah, this is a shiny pen. This pen has ink." Really not doing a good job. One of the guys, played by John Bernthal, great actor, says, "Do me a favor, write your name on the napkin there." And Jordan Belfort, Leo DiCaprio, says, I can't. I don't have a pen." Well, there you go. You got a pen. It's a really great scene, really funny. And the whole purpose of it is to have his salesman find a legitimate need for the consumer to sell them on the product, in this case, a pen. Not everyone needs the pen, but maybe they realize along the way that they do need the pen. And for the sake of fantasy football, we're doing a fun episode today where we're doing Sell Me This Pen, but with fantasy football players that all three of us aren't really sold on, that we want the other two people here to sell them on. Sell me this pen. Make us realize why we need this player on our rosters this year. Do not fade them. So without further ado, why don't we just kick it right off? Nick, why don't you start us off? What is one of the players that you want us to sell, or you want to sell us, or have us sell you to?
All right, so this is a guy I've kind of been struggling with the hype for, Alexander Mattison. Looking at the last 3 seasons in Minnesota, Dalvin Cook has ranked top 5 in opportunity share. So to me, that is kind of meant that Alexander Mattison hasn't really earned the touches that we would, think that a talented running back would as that number 2 guy there. We have to be, I think, careful with small windows to extrapolate them. You look at Samaje Perine last season, 11 through 13, those weeks he went off. Does that mean he could be a workhorse? Probably not. Zonovan Knight last season had some productive weeks 12 through 14. Zach Moss finished off week 18 as the running back 2. So if we extrapolate all of these small sample sizes as these backups, I think that we kind of get off track of what they can actually do. And I think that's what's kind of happening with Alexander Mattison. He, for his ADP right now, is running back 18. And to me, I struggle with that because I see guys like DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders and J.K. Dobbins going after him in these early redraft mocks. So I'd really like you guys to sell me on the hype of Alexander Mattison right now, especially at this ADP.
I personally am kind of with you on this. I have a hard time buying into him for a full season. So I'm going to let Sean take it away, see if he can sell you this pen player in Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, Madison, I was actually ecstatic in my first mock draft series that I did. I'm doing the standard mock. Colin is doing the PPR mock that after passing on running back and RB2 in particular, that I walked away with Madison, who I'm pretty big on this year, as my RB2. And the reason being, volume is key in fantasy. And when there is an absence of Dalvin Cook, there is a lot of volume for Alexander Mattison. And there's not really any one guy on that team that you'll look at and can point to of this is who he's going to lose that volume to. It's not like they've brought in another veteran running back. It'd be different if Zeke Elliott was sitting there right now. They got Zeke on a cheap 1-year deal, and he's the guy that's replacing Cook, and it's not a clear-cut Madison. But after Madison, there's a drop-off. And that late in the draft, it's hard to find guys that are going to be the guy on their team. You mentioned DeAndre Swift is one of them. Rashad Penny might be taking equal snaps to DeAndre Swift. I mean, we saw last year in Detroit that DeAndre Swift, as talented as he is, has had a hard time just being the guy on his team. His team just moved on from him. In fact, they spent a first-round pick on a running back, and they spent a lot of money in free agency, bringing in David Montgomery as well. So DeAndre Swift, I like him as a running back, but I don't know if he offers the same upside that Madison does in terms of being an every down back. And when he is that every down back, he is productive. Over the 6 games where Dalvin Cook didn't play with Madison, he's getting 23 touches per game. And if you take his averages from that stretch and put him over 17 games, it's a 1,900-yard season rushing and receiving combined to go along with 14 touchdowns. That's not a pace he's going to keep up. If he does, that's the ultimate steal of the draft. But even if he doesn't, if he comes up 1,500 combined yards, about 10 touchdowns, give or take, you're still walking away with the steal of the draft. A late RB2 that you're taking, like you mentioned, he was his ADP hasn't been about RB17. That's a heck of a running back to be walking away with those numbers they could be putting up at the end of the day. So if you're in a situation like I was with the mock that I did, if you wait on a running back and you need an RB2, some guy that you're going to be able to reliably plug in and play every single week, Madison could be the last of those guys available just based on volume alone, a player that you can rely on.
Yeah, I think in small sample sizes, we'd all agree that Alexander Mattison has done a fantastic job filling in for Dalvin Cook. The only thing that worries me with that volume is that he only has 404 carries over 4 seasons, 101 on average per season. So having
the flip
all
side
of
of that
sudden,
coin will be he's fresh. He's not like
true.
He's been beat up these last couple of years. So there's two sides to every story with it. So Madison's personally someone I'm big on, and it's that volume that he gets when Dalvin Cook isn't there. And, unless between now and training camp, they do sign another veteran receiver or running back, And as you mentioned before, there's a lot that are still out there. I mentioned Zeke Elliott, Kareem Hunt is prowling around out there as well. Leonard Fournette, there's other options that they could certainly bring in, but as it stands right now, it's Alexander Madison's job to lose as the every down back.
Yeah, it's definitely something we got to keep an eye on. Obviously, first they paid Alexander Madison on a 2-year, I believe, fully guaranteed deal, maybe $6 million out of 8. Now that it just comes to me, but then they also got rid of Dalvin Cook, so they're putting some faith in there. Obviously, in Alexander Madison, we need to see if they add another back in the future. Let's stay in the division with one of my guys. I need you to sell me on, and that's David Montgomery, now on the Detroit Lions. I'm not sold on David Montgomery because I really do just love Jahmyr Gibbs. That's first and foremost the first thing there. But I keep seeing people hyping up David Montgomery in this new opportunity. Obviously, he was signed before they drafted Gibbs, but the Detroit Lions front office were like swooning over Jahmyr Gibbs. It makes me think that he's going to be the guy you want in that backfield. Last 3 seasons, 247 carries to 225. Last year, just 201 rushing attempts. Obviously, introducing Justin Fields into the Bears offense, there's going to be less of an opportunity when your quarterback's running 160 times. But even with his opportunities, career average yards per carry, 3.9. And his target share went down 68 to 51 to 40 last 3 seasons. So sell me on the pen that is David Montgomery for the 2023 season.
So one thing that stands out for David Montgomery is he's perceived as the running back 2, I think, for a lot of people on this roster. And when we look at running back 2s and the hype that, we get for rostering certain guys, the, Jalen Warrens and the Jerome Fords, those sort of guys, at least we have in him a good resume or a decent resume. I know you mentioned some of the efficiency metrics, but he's never had a season under 800 rushing yards. He's had a 54 catch season. I know that went down a bit. He had a double-digit touchdown season under his belt as well. Jahmyr Gibbs drew great draft capital. He had a huge 44 catch season, his final season in college. But the rushing, I think, I'm not saying he cannot rush the ball or he doesn't do it efficiently, but he wasn't rushing at the rate like a Bijan Robinson was, who had over 100 more carries in the same amount of games in their final seasons of college. I think Montgomery personally is better than Jamal Williams. So I know that's going to be the first thing a lot of people say is, hey, Jamal Williams scored 100 touchdowns last season. He's the guy that's going to fill in that role. But I do think that we should at least note it. I'm not going to say he's going to score the same amount of touchdowns, but when you see Jamal Williams saw 57 red zone touches, which was number 2 for running backs last year, you at least think that that's a more David Montgomery suited opportunity than Jahmyr Gibbs. So I know people wish on these handcuffs. I think David Montgomery, if you classify him as that, would be one of the best, if not the best handcuff. But I feel like it is more of a committee. I'm with you, though, on one thing when it comes to buying into him this season. I think that he is probably going to be a little bit overdrafted as far as the ADP goes. I mean, we know Jahmyr Gibbs is there. So if he's being drafted as a top 20 running back, for instance, I think that's just too high for me, especially if we do think Jahmyr Gibbs is talented. So semi-selling you here.
Yeah, that last bit you said there is really the sticking point for me. I like David Montgomery. I like the opportunity available in Detroit. They got rid of Swift and Jamal Williams and replaced them with Gibbs and Montgomery. There's no telling that Gibbs is just going to take 100% of the carries and touches left behind. So David Montgomery is going to get his. It's just a matter of how much. And without that, concrete, history with the Detroit Lions, where he's going in drafts just makes me a little bit nervous. Maybe he is the red zone guy. Maybe he scores 17 rushing touchdowns like Jamal Williams did last year. Doubtful, but when you look at the receivers in Detroit, maybe they do lean on the run again. Sean, anything to add to David Montgomery?
I'll say with him, David Montgomery to me this year feels like the way Kareem Hunt has felt the last couple of years. He's got fringe standalone value. If you're in a deeper league, 12, 14, a 16 team league, I think he presents a lot more value than your typical quote unquote handcuff running back will. But then one of those, if anything happens to Gibbs, David Montgomery becomes the guy in a very run-heavy offense. So that's where I think the value in him comes is, against certain matchups in a deeper league, he's certainly startable as an RB2 or a flex. But if anything happens to Gibbs, Montgomery's value goes up. So it's similar to you have your cake and eat it too. You've got a handcuff, but at the same time, you've got someone that in a pinch in the right week, you can start if you need him to.
Yeah. I actually think he's one of the guys that's better than a handcuff. So Definitely a guy I'm targeting, even if I don't have Gibbs. You don't need Gibbs to have David Montgomery. I think that's important. Some people just like to target backfields as a whole, split them up, get variance on your rosters. Sean, why don't you give us a pen you need us to sell to you?
Yeah, and this is someone that burned me in a punishment league last year, who I was very proud to take. And it's Jonathan Taylor, the consensus RB1 pick one last year. And my thought process with him is if I'm in the situation where, say, I'm picking 5th overall, CMC, Eckler, Jefferson, Chase are the top 4, in my opinion. They're all gone. Why should I trust that Jonathan Taylor is going to bounce back to his 2021 form after the 2022 season that we all saw, where it's not like they made a big addition to the offensive line? The only real weapon they added to that offense was Anthony Richardson. He may not even start this season at any point, let alone to begin the year. And obviously Shane Steichen is the head coach and Jim Bob Cooter is the offensive coordinator. But why sell me on taking Jonathan Taylor as the 3rd running back, 5th pick over, the next set of guys like a Bijan, Saquon, Chubbs, Jacobs, or even a Derrick Henry?
Well, I don't think you have to take Jonathan Taylor at the 5th pick, but if you're on the clock with the 5th pick, I think he's a very worthy pick there, because obviously he was the 1st overall pick in your punishment league last year for a reason. 332 carries the year prior, obviously the RB1 overall. He was an absolute monster. He's still very, very young. This year, he's in a contract year. I really, really like that. Obviously, running backs are going through it right now, arguing about how much they should be paid, longevity. Maybe they franchise tag next year, or maybe they let him go and they run him into the ground this year. With a rookie quarterback, I think they're going to lean a lot on Jonathan Taylor this year. The reason he burned you last year is because he had a high ankle sprain. He wasn't bad. He also had Matt Ryan as his quarterback. I would hope that the quarterback play this year is a little bit better than Matt Ryan. They also went through a coaching change. It was a really, really ugly year for the Indianapolis Colts. I think Jonathan Taylor is now being priced accordingly too. Obviously, when a guy has a season like he did in 2021, he's worthy of the 1st overall pick in 2022. I'm buying the dip based on guys like yourself that are burned by him. I'm hoping in the back half of the 1st round, in drafts, PPR, standard, what have you, that Jonathan Taylor is there for me. And I think he will be. When you look at the running back landscape and you add a guy like Bijan Robinson into the mix, there's another guy that's probably going to get drafted ahead of Jonathan Taylor. That's music to my ears if I have picked 7, 8, 9. So you have CMC, Eckler, Bijan Robinson. Maybe people are taking Saquon. People are still hanging on to Derrick Henry. There's a lot of options up at the top there. And I think Jonathan Taylor, if you have the 5th pick, this is a guy that's done it before, so you can take him confidently there. I do think he is a positional advantage. Again, contract year, guy that's carried the ball over 300 times, does have receiving ability, but not really his forte. But I think in the red zone too, he's going to be the guy. When you look at guys behind him, it's Zach Moss, it's Deion Jackson. I think unless you guys have another name, the fact that I can't even remember them just goes to show you. No. So I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be the guy. And Shane Steichen, new head coach, looks at what he has. The receivers, we don't know about Michael Pittman just yet. Alec Pierce, not part of this regime, 2nd round pick last year. Jonathan Taylor, though, a guy that has, done it before. And when you look at Miles Sanders and what he did last year with Steichen with a mobile quarterback, career highs across the board. So I think we can all agree that Jonathan Taylor is a better running back than Miles Sanders. So I think Shane Steichen knows what he has in him, and I think he's going to use him a hell of a lot this year.
Yeah, I chose the 5th pick for my situation because I think that's about the first time you'll have to make a decision on whether or not Taylor kind of feels like the CMC of this year's draft. People have been burned on him last year. That took him number 1 overall. And are you able to look past being burned and taking him again? And if you took CMC last year, good on you. You had an awesome year. But there are going to be people that are sitting there and just don't trust Jonathan Taylor after the year that he had last year, and they're going to take someone else instead. And I think that decision will first come up depending on where you rank, Jefferson and Chase amongst the running backs after CMC and Eckler come off the board. I think that's when the question is, okay, who's going to take that lottery ticket on Jonathan Taylor and see if he can bounce back to his older form?
Yeah, I really just think that's what it comes down to is do you trust him or not, obviously with injuries and stuff. And high ankle sprains nag a little bit. Nick, anything to add on Jonathan Taylor?
No, I think, it's important to note the number ones beyond just the rushing yards and the total fantasy points in 2021. I mean, he was great. Evaded tackles, yards created, breakaway runs, just a lot of different categories beyond fantasy points that he was very good in. And with Anthony Richardson, this offense isn't changing in the fact that it's going to shift to more passing offense. So I don't think a lot changes for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe he gets like sniped in the red zone if we do have a mobile quarterback. But as far as the lack of competition, the amount of touches that he's guaranteed, those things remain the same. I almost wonder, how big of a variance he will be in drafts, because like Sean said, people remember getting burned before. So people also remember getting rewarded though. So maybe people have Jonathan Taylor heading into the season as their running back 1 or 2. Maybe there's people that say, hey, I'm not taking this chance, and he becomes a value and slips to the running back 6, 7 in your fantasy draft. So I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be different league to league for redraft, because I've seen a lot of different rankings come out recently, site to site, and he's been everywhere between the running back 2 to the running back 7. So it'll be interesting. He's a guy that I do think bounces back. I think I had him running back 4 or 5, my latest rankings, but yeah, I do have the faith, but he could become a value just because of being burned and lack of helping you win a championship last season.
This is where knowing the room in some smaller leagues can be helpful, because if you're in an 8-team league, you're picking 7th, and Jonathan Taylor's sitting there, and let's say Bijan Robinson, to throw another name out there, and the guy picking 8th was burned on Jonathan Taylor last year and is just sick and tired and done with him, you could potentially go Bijan and Jonathan Taylor if you play your cards right, depending on, like I said, just know the room.
Yeah, very good tidbit there. I was going to say the same thing. Know who you're drafting with. That's why home leagues are the best, because you know who the pettiest of your friends and family are. We're through one round here on the Fly Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick Skrip, Sean Malone, Colin McTamany, naming players that we need the other 2 guys in the room here to sell us on. Sell me this pen from the Wolf of Wall Street. Let's start up round 2 here and go back to Nick. Nick, give us another player or pen here that you need us to sell you on.
So this guy doesn't cost a lot in drafts or anything like that. I just think there's a lot of hope and want for him to be a thing, and I just don't see it. But it's Sky Moore for me, and I think that there's this scapegoat narrative that last year was a developmental year for Sky Moore, and we knew that Travis Kelce was going to out-target him. We knew that Juju Smith-Schuster was going to out-target him. But MVS, Jerick McKinnon, Mecole Hardman, who missed time, Noah Gray, Justin Watson, these are all players that had more targets in 2022 than Sky Moore, who did not play a single game in the regular season at 50% of the snaps. And you can say, well, they wanted him to be in the slot. They had Juju there, or whatever the case needs to be made. I feel like good players find ways to get on the field and earn targets, and he did not do either one of those things last year. And then we had some more red flags with them trading or going and grabbing Kadarius Toney last season. They spend a 2nd-round draft pick this year on Raji Rice. Richie James, a lot of people are going to write off, but he actually was pretty decent with the Giants. I'm not going to get all hot takey here with him, but I just see so many red flags for Sky Moore. But I see a lot of big-time analysts saying that the breakout is coming, and I just don't see it, just based off of lack of getting on the field, lack of earning targets. So
I'm going to abstain from this one. Sky Moore scored his first NFL touchdown in the Super Bowl against my Philadelphia Eagles, so I don't feel that I can give an honest approach here. Sean, I'm hoping that you can sell Nick on the Sky Moore pen.
Here's what I'll say about Sky Moore. He is, in our consensus rankings, wide receiver 62. So if you're drafting him, assuming 10-team league, it's wide receiver 7 level that we're talking about at that point. And if you're taking a wide receiver 7, one of 2 things is going to happen. He is going to boom for you, or he's going to be one of the first people you cut after week 1 and try to get whoever had a hot start to the season that's sitting on the waiver wire. And at that point in the draft, I'm all about you're chucking Hail Marys. So you look at the other wide receivers that are around that point. Michael Gallup is 2 spots up. Michael Gallup's a nice receiver, but I don't think he's overtaking CeeDee Lamb. I don't think he's overtaking Brandon Cooks, who is acquired as well. So I don't really see Michael Gallup having the same upside that Sky Moore does. Zay Jones actually had a nice season last year, but now Calvin Ridley is the wide receiver one. Everyone's going to move down a peg in place of him in Jacksonville. And then one spot below him, you got Donovan Peoples-Jones, another receiver that I don't think anyone really sees a ton of upside on. If you're taking Sky Moore, you're banking on the fact that there is fewer alpha wide receivers on the Chiefs last year heading into the season than there were the year before, where Juju Smith-Schuster was the alpha wide receiver. Marcus Valdes-Scantling is the only receiver that really put up numbers last year for the Kansas City Chiefs. I know they got Kadarius Toney midseason. This is where I'll abstain from saying nice things about Kadarius Toney as a New York Giants fan, even though we wound up walking away with Darren Waller, all said and done. But a New York Giants beat writer did make a great point about Kadarius Toney, and he said that what makes Kadarius Toney so special is also why he's always hurt. It's his stop and start ability, and it's on the level of Reggie Bush, his ability to just be going one direction and like a joystick, start moving in the opposite direction. And that it's kind of been breaking down his body throughout his short NFL career. That's why he's always missing practice with these soft tissue injuries. So, yeah, Kadarius Toney offers a lot of upside, but he's not going to be available this late in the draft. This late in the draft, if you're looking for just a Hail Mary wide receiver pick, which all of your picks should be at this point, you shouldn't be making safe picks with your final picks in the draft. I think Sky Moore presents the highest ceiling of anyone that's out there. You know, maybe you'd take a Michael Gallup, and at best he's wide receiver 3, but I think Sky Moore has the best opportunity of any of those guys to be a high-end wide receiver 2. Maybe if he does become the darling of Patrick Mahomes' eye, a low-end wide receiver 1. I'm not betting money on it personally, but amongst all the guys that are there, that's probably the best bet you're going to get out of those chances.
So when you're thinking of selling us pens as far as players go, Sky Moore, is it safe to say, is that pen that you didn't come to class with and you asked a friend to borrow and it runs out of ink, you just chuck it?
Yep.
You know, it is
That's
what
exactly
it is.
what it is. And otherwise, it's the most comfortable pen that you've ever felt in your entire life. You're looking up on Amazon what brand of pen that is. So
you got an A on the test that you used it for?
Exactly.
Yeah,
that becomes your lucky pen.
Well, I think on the topic of Chiefs wide receivers, real quick on the fly, if you will, players not named Travis Kelce, who do you guys think, real quick, is going to lead the Chiefs in targets beyond Travis Kelce this year? Sean, go ahead.
Marcus Valdes-Scantling. I listed him as one of my sleeper wide receivers because he's the only one back that brings a consistent rapport with Patrick Mahomes.
Okay.
You know, he's known as a burner, so he kind of fits that mold of Mecole Hardman and Tyreek Hill. And I think it's just one of those, he's walking into a beautiful situation where there's nothing really consistently around. I said with Toney, and even Kadarius Toney, he gets hurt all the time. And even when he's not missing games from a fantasy perspective, you always have to keep in the back of your mind of, okay, he's been questionable all week, hasn't practiced. Is he going to show up and play on Sunday, or am I going to have to insert this guy into my lineup instead? So Marcus Valdes-Scantling, I think, amongst the Chiefs wide receivers would be my pick for who's going to lead them in targets. Nick, what about you?
I would say if we can bank on a healthy season, I have to go with Kadarius Toney, just because we've seen him get utilized creatively in Kansas City with Andy Reid. So I think if he is healthy, he is on the field, I would bet on him over a Sky Moore. I think I'd bet on Raji Rice over Sky Moore as well. I think they went and spent a decent draft pick on him, and I think that says a lot. I know they did the same for Sky Moore, but again, he wasn't on the field. He wasn't utilized at all. MVS is interesting. I think MVS is, a great best ball player, but not a guy that's been a big volume, receiver almost ever. But it's up for grabs. And I think you can take Kansas City. You can take a couple other NFL teams and really just throw a dart at the end of the day between Carolina and, some of the Houston, some of these other teams that nobody knows who the, number one target's going to be. And whoever it is it going to be consistent?
Just want to touch back on Jonathan Taylor before looking at the YouTube comments. Wendy Early chimed in and said, Taylor is dead to me. So if you're in an 8-team league and you're sitting with pick 7 and Wendy's got pick 8 and 9 in the bookends, pass on Jonathan Taylor because, Wendy is absolutely not taking him with either one of those two picks.
It's good to know if she's drafting in Chicago like I am, which might be the case. So I'm taking notes here. There we go.
It's gonna be really interesting too when the Chiefs sign DeAndre Hopkins and all of this discussion goes right out the window.
See ya.
Yeah. An exciting player that I have, and I need you guys to sell me on because, I collect sports cards here and there. I actually have one of his rookie cards. I really, really like him. He's really big, really fast, and he's presumably the wide receiver one on his own team, and that's Christian Watson. Sell me the pen on Christian Watson. 7 touchdowns in 4 straight games. All 7 touchdowns as a rookie season were just in a 4-game sample size. 2 100-yard games, 2 8-target games. Other than that, everything was less than 8 targets. He wasn't drawing a ton of targets from Aaron Rodgers. In my PPR mock draft on fantraxhq.com, comes out every Monday. I just did the first one right on 4th of July weekend. Christian Watson was in round 6, wide receiver 27. Sell me on why that's not too high of a pick for Christian Watson to be on my PPR fantasy teams this year.
I'll jump in on this, and I do agree. I think Christian Watson is going a little high, but the reason that he's going high is the selling point I've got. It's all about the upside. Yeah, he was super touchdown dependent last year and didn't get a ton of targets, but even outside of the targets that the touchdowns, he still had a semi-productive stretch considering how few targets that he had. 52 targets, 31 catches, 523 yards in the final 8 games of the season. And, that's from that 3 touchdown performance onward to the end of the season when he really started to explode on the scene. And it kept looking like, all right, this is going to be the week that Christian Watson cools off. And it never really came around. There's a lot of opportunity for that volume to increase this season. 160 targets with now Lazard in New York and Tunyon moving on as well are available for someone to reel in. And who's to say that won't be Christian Watson? I mean, he was the next guy up amongst the Packers last season. Christian Watson could easily step up and take a large part of those 160 targets that are sitting there waiting for someone to go to at this point. A lot of people are going to point to Aaron Rodgers leaving as a reason that it may not be pretty still, but let's call a spade a spade. Rodgers was not great last year. He was good. It was numbers that Jordan Love could probably replicate again. I think it was 26 touchdowns and about a dozen interceptions that he had last season. Human numbers for a guy that usually plays at an inhuman level. And again, with the amount of work he was able to do with his targets, I think there's wide receiver one upside with Christian Watson. And I think that's why he's going higher than some of the other wide receivers that are there. It kind of goes back to some of the selling points I mentioned before of this guy looks like he could be way better than he's actually being drafted. He might wind up falling lower, but I think he won't fall much lower from where he's drafted compared to how much higher he could wind up where he's drafted. I think it's the upside that's kind of ballooning their stock a little bit.
Yeah, the only thing for me is that I really like a lot of the other playmakers on this offense. I think Aaron Jones returning to Green Bay is a really, really big thing that's kind of flown under the radar here. We're just so used to him being in green and gold that, okay, Aaron Jones is back. He could have easily left. The Packers could have let him walk, cut him in free agency. He could have been playing somewhere else. Chose to come back. They still have A.J. Dillon in the backfield. And those are 2 guys that Jordan Love in his first year as a full-year starter could lean on a little bit more. Romeo Doubs, 5th-round pick from last year. Jaden Reed. Who am I thinking of? Luke Musgrave, tight end. These are all young guys. It's a really young, exciting team that I'm excited to watch, but I just have a hard time banking on the fact that, oh, yeah, well, Christian Watson's going to be the wide receiver one on this team. It's hard for me to invest the draft capital that he's demanding right now with those sort of expectations. I might be really wrong, but I'm okay being wrong on this one. And, when he's sitting there on the board, I may feel a little bit differently depending on who else is there if I need a wide receiver. But as of now, I don't know when looking at the case of pens, if we're doing the sell me this pen thing, if the pen that says Christian Watson on it has the most ink, the most juice, the thing that's going to get me through what I needed to do. Nick, anything on Christian Watson or this Green Bay offense that you want to add?
Yeah, I think the appeal is obviously the efficiency with the yardage department. What he does, with maybe limited receptions and targets. So he's a guy that can probably win you a week, but also is a guy that probably won't do much for you the next like 3 or 4 weeks. I just don't think that his consistency for fantasy is going to be what his draft capital is going to end up. Just in all honesty, I was not a fan of him as a prospect. 43 catches his final season at North Dakota State. I mean, he's not coming from a background where he's used to volume. And I think a lot of expectations is that he is going to be this team's wide receiver one and consistently see targets. But he's not done that in his career before. Can he make the big plays? Absolutely. Could he be a touchdown threat? Absolutely. Can you depend on him weekly to see 8 targets, 7 targets to where he's going to always make the plays that he needs to? I don't know. And then, you look at the draft capital or where he's going right now. I'm checking out Fantasy Pros. He's going before guys like just some guys I like better. He's going before Drake London. He's going before DJ Moore, even Chris Godwin. I like with Baker Mayfield. Deontay Johnson's a guy I think can bounce back. JSN, I think I like in redraft as well better than Christian Watson. I feel like if he's being drafted around the wide receiver 20, you're more really just hoping that you're catching him on an upside week for some of those other guys that I think are going to be a little bit more consistent. So not a big fan as a prospect. I don't think there's going to be a ton of consistency. Great best ball guy. He's going to win some weeks, but I'm just not into the draft capital right now.
It's interesting you mentioned JSN because now I'm curious where you have Tyler Lockett. I imagine DK Metcalf's ahead of him, but do you have all 3 Seahawks wide receivers ahead of the consensus wide receiver 1 for Green Bay? I don't think anyone's really putting Romeo Doubs ahead of Christian Watson. So do you have Lockett ahead of Christian Watson as well?
I don't have Lockett above him, and
I figured someone had to fall down then at that point.
Yeah, I think there, and it could be hot takey. It could be hot takey. I think there's a good chance. Just talking about JSN, I think there's a chance that he could lead the team in targets this year. I'm not saying he will lead the team in fantasy points necessarily, but as far as a talent goes, I think he's the most talented wide receiver on the roster. So maybe I'm too high in him year 1. Maybe he doesn't have the upside of Christian Watson, but comparing talents, I don't think it's even miles close when it comes to those two guys. And then, a guy like DJ Moore, a lot of people are kind of iffy on because of the passing volume in Chicago last season, but I'm taking DJ Moore over Christian Watson because I think he's going to be much more consistent and see the volume that he can actually handle versus Christian Watson, who's never handled volume in his career. So I don't know. I could be too low.
No, I'm with you on a couple of those guys. I'll throw just from our consensus rankings, like DeAndre Hopkins in there as well, who we've got ranked 2 spots, which I still think is a travesty that, it's not like he's going to be a free agent when week 1 is kicking off on the season.
He's going to be on the Chiefs. We already went over that.
Exactly. No, knowing how Howie Roseman works, you guys are somehow going to pull DeAndre Hopkins to the Philadelphia Eagles.
Don't jinx it. Come on.
I'll burn fantasy.
Well, let's continue on here with talent and a guy that's quite as polarizing, I would say, as Christian Watson. And we'll finish up round 2 here of sell me this pen/player. Sean, give us one of your guys that you need us to sell you on this year.
I'm going to go with, admittedly, all 3 of my guys I've been burned on in the last 2 years. I mentioned Jonathan Taylor burned me in my punishment league that I do with my friends out here in Missouri. Kyle Pitts burned me in like all but 2 leagues, I think. I was huge on him last year. I was one of those guys taking Kyle Pitts in round 3. Did not work out, to say the least. My thing with him here is I'm not eyeing him as a round 3 pick, but I'm in a situation where, it's later. A couple of the good tight ends have gone off the board. Should I take Kyle Pitts over that next tier of tight ends, such as a Dallas Goedert, who right now in Fantrax ADP is sitting 2 spots lower in PPR, or should I wait even further, take a Pat Freiermuth instead and pick up, at the ADP guys that going around the same slot as Pitts are Gibbs, Javonte Williams, Jerry Jeudy, Calvin Ridley, Cam Akers, and in PPR it's Tyler Lockett, Pacheco, Ayuk, James Conner, and Evans. So I can walk away with Freiermuth and one of those guys, or I can walk away with Kyle Pitts. So that's where, me being burned on Kyle Pitts, I have a hard time being sold on him. Is just, I think to myself, last year with the targets that he got, it's not like he was being fed the ball a crazy amount. It's not like he got the ball when he was targeted. He's only got 0 games with 5 or more receptions in 2022, none of them last year, and only 2 with 3 or more. Or more than 3, excuse me. So tell me why I should trust that Kyle Pitts is going to finally live up to the potential that we all know he's capable of.
Kyle Pitts is only 22 years old. So it's not shocking that he burned you last year, because we all made mistakes when we were 21, right? I mean, it's par for the course.
None that I'm admitting here on the podcast, unless you want to talk about fantasy.
We're talking about Kyle Pitts. We're talking about Kyle Pitts strictly. But here, listen, he had 356 yards last year. That's absolutely abysmal for where he was going in drafts. But rewind it back a year as the 4th overall pick, as a 20-year-old, drafted to the Atlanta Falcons, 1,000 yards as a rookie, 3rd most targets of all time as a rookie tight end. I think the potential is still a little untapped for this kid. In just 10 games last year, he saw the 2nd most targets in Atlanta with 59. That offense was really, really bad. And I know he's now in midnight green on the Eagles backing up Jalen Hurts, but Marcus Mariota was absolutely atrocious. Seasons of 12 or more starts, that's 4 in Tennessee, and obviously last year in Atlanta. Last year, he threw for the lowest amount of yards in any of those seasons, just 2,200 yards. 3rd lowest touchdowns in those seasons with 15, and then the 3rd most interceptions with 9. The 2 times he threw more picks were his rookie season, and in the other year, he threw more picks than last year. He played in 2 additional games than last year. So just on a per-game basis, Marcus Mariota was just awful. I mean, I'm already having flashbacks. There was a play where he was like facing this way, but had to throw it that way and just like chucked it over his head.
Yeah, when he was getting
sacked.
Yeah.
Oh God. Yeah. He's not Patrick Mahomes. Not even close. And I was excited about Mariota coming into the league. He is a backup as far as backups go, but Kyle Pitts, I mentioned before, 59 targets last year in 10 games, 5.9 targets per game, obviously doing the math there. 7th most amongst tight ends at the position of tight ends that played 10 games or more. I think now Kyle Pitts is properly ranked. Came into the league, 4th overall pick. Everyone's hyped up. We saw what he did at Florida. Then he puts up 1,000 yards. Not the greatest rookie season, 1 touchdown, and it wasn't even in America. It was in London. So
against
obviously,
the Jets of all teams too.
Right. And man, everyone thought that was it. He was going to take off. But still, 1,000 yards as a rookie, 20 years old. People were still pretty high on him. Last year, he's definitely come down a couple notches. So I think this is the year of all years that you can invest in Kyle Pitts. And there's still some good backups you can get later in the draft. I don't love rostering 2 tight ends on a typical 1 quarterback, 16 team roster, but it is a position you kind of have to. But if your league isn't, and everyone's just drafting, 1 tight end per team, that's 10 tight ends, maybe 12 get drafted. There's still going to be some options out there that can pop in 2023 that if Kyle Pitts doesn't work out, you'll know pretty quickly. But again, I think Desmond Ridder, assumed week 1 starter, is going to be Marcus Mariota. It's going to be hard not to be. Bijan Robinson is going to keep defenses extremely honest. I think Kyle Pitts is going to see a ton of one-on-one coverage. I just think this is the year that he breaks out, per se. I'm not saying he's going to overtake Travis Kelce as the tight end 1, but if he's being drafted as the tight end 5, 6, 7, I think he can finish as the tight end 5, 6, 7. So if you want a guy that you can start week to week on your roster, I think this is the year you can finally trust in Kyle Pitts to do that. Nick, anything to add on Pitts?
Yeah, just a few positive notes. With Desmond Ridder last season, in 4 games, he threw the ball 30-plus times in 2 of them, which was the same amount of times Marcus Mariota threw the ball 30-plus times in 13 games. So it seemed like the coaching staff was allowing Desmond Ridder to throw the ball a bit more than the rate was with Marcus Mariota. I don't know if it was more of a test to see if this is going to actually be their guy for the next season or what the case was going to be, but that was slightly encouraging there. The other thing too, I mean, if we're going to bet on talent, I think he's a guy you would like to bet on at the end of the day, just because of how highly touted of a prospect he was and what we saw his rookie season with all the numbers that you noted there. So I think they will pass the ball more than they did last season. We saw it the last couple of weeks. I think what you said, Colin's very accurate with Bijan Robinson keeping defenses honest, which might open up things for both Pitts and London. But I like what Sean said earlier about, like maybe passing on him for a guy like Pat Freiermuth, who's one of my favorite targets this year. I think that's what you have to juggle with a guy like Kyle Pitts. Do I want to take the chance that he actually lives up to the athleticism and the talent, or do I take somebody else, wait, and then take a guy like Pat Freiermuth, who maybe I don't have as far from Kyle Pitts as other people do? That's the same thing you do with the quarterback position. Maybe I don't want to invest in the pick that it would cost of Patrick Mahomes. Maybe I take somebody else and take a Lamar Jackson who also has QB1 overall upside. These are things you're going to have to juggle in your fantasy drafts, and you just have to identify these players and weigh out, will they live up to what the cost is? Will they live up to expectations, or can I take somebody I view is kind of close to them in rankings who goes further in the drafts? And that's going to be the Kyle Pitts, I think, juggle in your home leagues this year.
And I'll say this to throw in one last point. You mentioned Bijan Robinson, now a member of the Falcons. Let's not forget Bijan Robinson is a really, really good receiving back as well. So, yeah, he's certainly going to be helping unload the box or load up the box a little bit more. They're going to have to respect Bijan Robinson in Atlanta, but he's going to be getting a lot of targets. It's not like they're just going to bring him in just to be a bell cow running back. This is not Derrick Henry. This is a guy that can do everything out of the running back spot. So Bijan Robinson, he's a running back. It's not like he's going to be Alvin Kamara, but I think he's going to be getting a lot of targets in the passing game as well. So, that's one of my concerns. It's not like it was, they were absolutely feeding the ball like crazy to Kyle Pitts throughout his Atlanta career. We could see him even getting fewer targets this coming year just because a lot of them could be going the way of Bijan Robinson now.
Yeah, I think this is one of the players that's going to be the toughest to sell anyone on. But it's one of those gut calls you have to have when you're in the middle of your draft. To go into any draft and say, I'm not drafting Kyle Pitts, or it is really not the way to approach any draft as a fantasy football manager. You have to be flexible. Kyle Pitts is there in the 9th round. You're telling me you're not drafting Kyle Pitts? Of course not. So one of those guys that's going to be polarizing. I think a lot of the players we've named tonight are, but I could see the argument for both. I very much understand if you are burned by Kyle Pitts and don't want to draft him.
And I'm a huge Kyle Pitts fan. Like, my pro comp for him coming out of college was Calvin Johnson, because that was the only thing comparable to someone
pretty good
that big who moved like him.
Confirm.
I'm just worried with in the last 2 years adding Drake London, adding Bijan Robinson. Maybe Desmond Ritter's nice, but I don't know if he'll be an elite quarterback that, is there going to be enough opportunity for him to live up to the expectations that everybody put on him coming into the league, especially after that 1,000-yard rookie season that he had?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope he's going to haul in more than 356 yards this season. I will say that. As most of you know, listening to the fly here, it's July 6, 2023. If you're familiar with the Scott Fishbowl League or draft, it's run by Scott Fish. Probably see it on Twitter, #SFB13. Obviously, in its 13th season, it kicks off tonight with a live draft in Buffalo. There's going to be a multitude of live drafts over the next couple weekends. It's a slow draft. The slow drafts all start on Monday, so they're scattered about. It's about, I don't know, guys, 200 leagues or so across the world, pretty much, with fantasy managers from different states, countries, all backgrounds, analysts, fans, celebrities, and it all kicks off tonight. And one of the key aspects of that league is a third round reversal. So you go down round 1, back up round 2, and then you start back at the bottom of round 3 to go back. So the third round reversal. So in the spirit of Scott Fishbowl, we are going to go back to the bottom of the order here. And I'm going to kick it back to Sean. And for most people that play in Scott Fishbowl know, all proceeds go to charity, fantasycares.org. So please look into that and donate whatever you can. Scott Fish does a great job. A lot of people do a great job putting that all together. So I know I'm competing in it. I'm drafting Philly live draft on Sunday. I don't know if you guys are drafting in it, but it's always a great time. And it's really hard to win, but it's fun to try to get there. So with that said, Sean, why don't you go to your last player here, third round reversal. Give us the last pen you want us to sell here to you.
Yeah, my last pen is Russell Wilson. I'll throw a quarterback in the mix here. And the situation I'm thinking is maybe I'm in a deeper league and I just kept waiting to take a quarterback. and all the top ones are gone. All the next tier of reliable ones are gone. And I'm picking between guys like Russell Wilson, Jared Goff, Derek Carr, Matthew Stafford. And why should I trust that we're going to see the Russell Wilson from a couple of years ago and not the one we saw last year or even the year before that? He was QB 13 on a points per game basis 2 years ago, minimum 4 games played. So it's not including guys that just balled out for one single game and inflated the stats at the end of the season. Russell Wilson is not been, this isn't your older brother's Russell Wilson that, a couple of years ago was somewhere between QB3 and QB6 reliable pick. This is a guy that at QB 18 last year, fringe roster spot at that point, So if I'm waiting for a quarterback, sell me on why I should take Russell Wilson over a couple of those other quarterbacks that will be available if you wait in your draft.
Nick, you got any selling points on Russell Wilson?
I'm with you, Sean, especially with looking at who is going around him, who might have a little bit more upside. If I were to try to sell you, I just look at the resume of the past 7 top 12 quarterback finishes as far as points per game goes out of 11 seasons, top 6 and 5 of those seasons. He has 4 seasons over 4,000 passing yards. The one sneaky thing nobody really talks about is that he's been a guy that has rushed for over 300 yards 8 times, and that actually does a lot for the quarterback position when trying to identify some rushing upside. Sean Payton's a big hire that's going to be talked about a lot. The biggest Russell Wilson comp through time has been Drew Brees, ironically, and that's who worked with Drew Brees in the past. So you have his new Drew Brees, I guess. You can try to, sell that. I'm not going to, talk about a crazy bounce back. I love Jerry Jeudy. So I'm big on him having a good season. Cortland Sutton, I think, provides some upside. A lot of people like Greg Dulcich, Marvin Mims. For some people, people were high on him. But I think we just say, hey, he's had a history of decent fantasy points per game. He has some sneaky rushing upside. The head coach might help. But I'm with you. I think there's some other guys that I think could be more of weekly winners than Russell Wilson, who might be very safe at times versus really helping you win a championship this year.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how last year you have all these veterans: Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Matthew Stafford, Matt Ryan, all these guys that were so great to watch over the last couple of years. And Tom Brady, I forgot Tom Brady. Tom Brady threw for an NFL record most passing attempts, but the Bucs were just really hard to watch. They all just kind of fell off a cliff holding hands at the same time. And now we're hoping that the guys that are still in the league, obviously Tom Brady retired, didn't fall all the way off the cliff. They're hanging on to a rock and can climb back up to the top. I would say I have the most faith in Aaron Rodgers to do that, but he's turning 40. So it's a dangerous game to do that. As far as Russell Wilson goes, you kind of have to just throw last year out. 16 passing touchdowns. I mean, if you told me Russell Wilson was going to throw for 16 passing touchdowns after what the Denver Broncos traded to get him, I mean, I just would have told you were crazy last March, April, or however. Jerry Jeudy's there. Cortland Sutton's there. They had a good run game. It just completely fell apart. They scored the lowest points per game in the league. And if they didn't, the Colts did. So they're bottom 2. Another team we talked about that can hopefully rise out of the ashes. Sean Payton, like Nick said, huge hire. It comes down to what have you done versus what have you done for me lately. And I know this is a player that's burned you, Sean, burned a lot of people last year. He's not getting drafted high, if at all, in a lot of 1 QB leagues. So there's that. But as far as what have you done for me lately, 2022 as a whole, yeah, not great. They fired Nathaniel Hackett, who ironically is now with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. They fired Nathaniel Hackett in the final 2 games. It looked like a weight was lifted off of Russell Wilson's shoulders. He scored 24.4 points per game in week 17 and 18. I know a lot of leagues don't count week 18, but it still matters at how he played. That would be, for those 2 weeks, the QB2 on a points per game basis. So a glimmer of hope, but I'm not banking on it. I would probably tell you that this pen is not the pen for you if I was trying to sell it, but I'm still hoping you buy it, I guess, if I'm in a league with you. I don't really know what
This
else
is
to
not
say.
a pen that you use.
No, it's not a pen that I use, but
It
some
used
people
to
do
work.
like it.
Yeah, you handed me a
it's-
different pen to sign the receipt.
I'm clicking it. I'm scribbling on my hand, hoping there's still some left in there. But yeah, I think we go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead. I was going to jump in and, if you do find yourself in this situation, I think I mentioned it on the QB episode that we had a couple of weeks ago, where if you're waiting late in the draft to take your quarterback, you've probably filled out the rest of your roster with reliable players. And my strategy in leagues where they do that at that point is pull more than one lottery ticket, because that's what they are this late in the draft. So don't walk away with just Russell Wilson and hope that, your numbers align and Russell Wilson is a big payout. Pull Jared Goff as well, pull Matt Stafford, and see if one of those three guys becomes a top 10 quarterback for you, and then you can cut the other two. So that's my mindset when I come into leagues. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to roster 3 quarterbacks in fantasy, but keep in mind, when you're drafting your team, you're only drafting your team at the start of the season. So it's not like all 3 of those guys are locked in with them all season long. Don't be afraid to take 3 quarterbacks if you've got the rest of your team that you're comfortable with, because as I said earlier with the Sky Moore, these are going to be the first guys that, you sacrifice to the waiver wire gods and hope that whoever you pick up in week 1 is going to turn out to be the waiver wire pick of the season.
Yeah, I think, again, with these veterans that you're hoping for, there's a lot of quarterbacks that are getting drafted ahead of these guys that have worse weapons.
Yes.
And I really think Russell Wilson, I believe in Jerry Jeudy, I believe in Cortland Sutton to a degree still. I do like the Samaje Perine signing. Javonte Williams is hopefully back soon, Greg Dulcich. So he is still surrounded by a very good offense, and they invested in 2 very, very important key offensive linemen in free agency, and Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers this offseason. So protection for Russ can only help. Let's keep things moving.
If you did have to rank the weapons amongst the 4, Wilson in Denver, Goff in Detroit, Carr in New Orleans, and Stafford in LA, what are your thoughts on that? I'll go first to give you guys a second to think. I'm going Wilson. I think he's by far got the best weapons of the bunch. I'll go Carr second, because Kamara is going to come back. If he gets suspended, he's going to come back from suspension at some point. They've got Olave back for year 2. Maybe Michael Thomas has found the fountain of youth and he can stay healthy. Stafford, I'll go third because he's got Cooper Kupp, and who's probably the best single player amongst them. And then I'll go Goff last, especially with Williams facing suspension this year. Quickly, if you guys, I don't want to take up too much time on Wilson, but if you have any thoughts on where you'd rank those weapons, if that's a factor people are considering.
No, I think Wilson. I think Wilson would be in the top. I'm going to bring Aaron Rodgers into the conversation. He brought all of his friends from Green Bay, his list of demands, and he's got Garrett Wilson, and that just puts him over the top of all these guys for me.
Agreed.
Nick, what do you think?
I think that's fair. I thought you brought up some good points to each of those situations. So I'd put Wilson at number 1 too, which should give him a little bump when it comes to comparing those guys.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to keep things moving here. The last guy I want you guys to sell me on is near and dear to my heart because my Philadelphia Eagles traded for him this offseason. During the NFL draft, Howie Roseman was able to send a 4th-round pick to the Detroit Lions for DeAndre Swift, second in Lions targets last year with 70, more points per game than Jamal Williams, who scored 17 rushing touchdowns. I know DeAndre Swift didn't play every game, but he still scored 13.5 points per game to Jamal Williams' 12.9. But even with the PPR upside, the Eagles running backs were the least targeted group of running backs in the league last year, 61 total. DeAndre Swift had 70 and didn't even play all the games. Can he be a workhorse in Philly? We saw Miles Sanders do that last year. Sell me on why he should be the lead back in Philadelphia this year, perhaps the same or even better as Miles Sanders.
I'm going to go on just a quick DeAndre Swift rant just because that's been one of my guys since he's been drafted, but he's never been outside the top 15 in fantasy points per game for the running back position. I statted out the games that he saw 50% plus of the snaps, and he averaged 16.54 points per game. So he's been very good when he's actually on the field touching the ball. Number 2 in yards per touch for 2022, top 5 in both 2022 and 2020 in yards per route run, top 12 in yards per reception, both in 2022 and 2020. He was number 5 in yards created in 2021. Rushing efficiency. I think a lot of people look at DeAndre Swift is just like a straight pass catching running back like an Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler doesn't run the ball that great. He doesn't run the ball a lot. To me, DeAndre Swift does very good in both of those aspects when given the chances. We've seen some big rushing days out of DeAndre Swift. The yards per carry have been over 4 yards for 3 straight seasons when he's actually touching the ball. You mentioned Miles Sanders. There's a lot of vacated rushing attempts, 259. There were 61 running back specific targets last season. And a lot of people will point out that, that Philly doesn't throw the ball to the running backs and that Jalen Hurts doesn't throw the ball to running backs. But Kenny Gainwell is not anywhere near as talented as DeAndre Swift, in my opinion. I don't think anybody in that system has been as talented as DeAndre Swift as a pass catcher. So now you have a new weapon in Philadelphia that can be utilized to their strengths, and that's DeAndre Swift. So just like checking the boxes here, been highly efficient for fantasy when it comes to scoring. I do think he's a very talented dual threat running back. I know Rashad Penny's there, and he will get work because Rashad Penny is good at running the football. But if we're going to toss out the injury concerns, I think Penny outweighs Swift in this sense. He lands in Philly, his hometown, one of the best NFL offenses out there that scores a lot. So DeAndre Swift, if I was buying into him his entire career, I'm not going to stop at this point, and I'm not going to fear the injuries because it's not like we have to draft him as a top 12 running back this year or anything along those lines. So give me Philly's new weapon.
Yeah, I'd Swift on a couple of my teams last year as my RB1. If I do that this year, I better have a very good group of wide receivers or Travis Kelce on my roster. I will say that. I do a bold prediction article for each division on fantraxhq.com. The NFC East one is out there right now, and I do have Rashad Penny rushing for 1,000 yards, which you say, oh, that's not hard to do. But for Rashad Penny, with only 337 career carries since 2018, that'd be a pretty big feat for him. So I think both of those guys there, and a good point to bring up is I think they're going to drive Kenneth Gainwell's playing time downward, which stinks because I do like him a lot. Boston Scott might only play when they play the Giants. Sorry, Sean.
No, I know. Boston Scott is a go-to DFS start for me every time
Absolutely.
The Giants and Eagles get together.
I don't bet often, but when I do, it's on Boston Scott touchdowns versus the New York Giants.
Yep.
Nick, take us home here with your last player you need us to sell you in fantasy football this season.
All right, so I had a bunch of notes on Deebo Samuel, and I won't take up too much time. Just for time's sake here, I'll spark note the whole thing. Had that major 2021 season, averaged really nice fantasy points per game, but he was outside the top 20 in targets, receptions, 55th in true catch rate. I think that was the season highly guided by the touchdowns, which 8 out of 14 of them were rushing. He was third in rushing attempts that season. Now we look at the 2022 season, and he was 5th on the team in rushing attempts. I think that in 2023, there's not necessarily a need for him to be this gadget wide receiver with Christian McCaffrey and Elijah Mitchell in the backfield. I think there is a true chance that Brandon Ayuk, after a huge season, could turn into this team's wide receiver 1. And then the biggest asterisk right now is the quarterback situation. Who's going to be the starter? Why do we not know who the clear-cut starter is? A lot of people will say Brock Purdy. There's people that say Trey Lance will, take the job week 2. I think there's just a lot of question marks to the upside of Deebo Samuel because of those things. So I'm a little, polarized here to where we should actually rank him. But I think you guys might be a bit higher than me.
I'm very high on Deebo Samuel. I've had him on my main dynasty league for years now. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. So consider him one of my guys for this season and for all of time. In 2021, wide receiver 3, 20.7 points per game, 7.1 targets per game. 25% of his points, as you mentioned, Nick, were from his rushing abilities. He had 8 rushing touchdowns, 59 attempts, 600 yards rushing, 8 touchdowns. If you take away all of his rushing from that season, 254.5 points, and he played 16 games. You divide that, 15.9 points per game still without all of that rushing. That's wide receiver 13, 14 on a full game slate. So that's kind of where I think Deebo Samuel is right now. Maybe not 13, 14, but he's getting drafted as a back-end wide receiver too. And I think that's a safe spot to draft him in. Obviously, when you finish as the wide receiver 3 on a points per game basis in 2021, like Jonathan Taylor that Sean mentioned, his stock's going to go way up. So He only had room really to disappoint last season because the rushing was just not going to be there, especially when they traded for Christian McCaffrey. Wide receiver 24, in fact, 13.7 points. Still, though, 7.23 targets per game, so not much different. And when Christian McCaffrey came into town and Deebo Samuel was playing football, 6.9 targets per game. A little bit of injury history there, but when you look at my top 200 PPR rankings on Fantrax, I have him as wide receiver 17. That's after guys like Devontae Smith, Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf. I think all of us would agree they'd take those guys, or at least 2 out of 3 of them, over Deebo. But he's ahead of guys like Keenan Allen, Drake London, Chris Godwin. Starts to get a little hinky there. The reason I do love Deebo Samuel, though, is because he is a yak monster, yards after the catch. 2,132 of his career 3,230 regular season yards. 66% are from yards after the catch. Get him the ball and see what he does with it. As far as yak per reception amongst wide receivers by season, he's ranked second, first, and first in the last 4 in order. This is a special player. I just saw a video today of him on a treadmill. He hit 18 miles per hour on the treadmill. He's still got it. Rare exception, though, of a team that has 2 wide receiver ones, like you mentioned, Nick, in Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, just playing on the same team. Deebo's on most other teams, he's their wide receiver 1. Just so happens that he's battling Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle for targets. But you're not drafting him as a top 10 wide receiver this year. You're getting him as your wide receiver 2, maybe even a high-end wide receiver 3. And I think that's probably where he finishes. But he's going to give you wide receiver 1 weeks, and that's why I really like him this season.
I'll say this about
go ahead,
Deebo.
Sean.
He's still getting, even when Christian McCaffrey showed up, he was still getting touches out of the backfield. It's not like that aspect of his game just completely disappeared. And one of the weird things with Deebo, you mentioned the question of who's going to be a quarterback. Just because of his style of play, it's a lot of short stuff that he likes to turn up the field and, getting the ball out of the backfield. I almost feel like it's a bizarro world where the lesser the quarterback play San Francisco has, the more I like Deebo Samuel, because they're trying to simplify things for the quarterback. And, it's really easy to just, give it to Deebo Samuel on a drag route and let him gain, 15 yards after the catch, or just a quick little shuttle pass to Deebo Samuel, or a handoff even out of the backfield. So it's one of those weird things where if Trey Lance turns into this awesome quarterback, I think the biggest benefactor is Ayuk more than Deebo Samuel. But if we get, a okay season from Brock Purdy, nothing that's going to wow you, but, like Jimmy Garoppolo light basically from the last couple of years, I think that really helps Deebo Samuel more than it does Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important for Brock Purdy, who's coming back from elbow injury. It seems like he would be the week 1 starter. The best thing for him is to just get the ball into his playmakers' hands. And like you said, Deebo Samuel, one of the best on the roster. Mm-hmm. Just to recap here on the fly, episode 42, we're recording this on July 6th, live on Fantrax's Twitter account here. Nick Skrip, Sean Malone, myself, Colin McTamany. We went over 3 players each who we needed the other 2 to sell us on, and we took it from the Wolf of Wall Street, sell me this pen bit that goes on in the movie there. Thank you guys so much for coming on tonight. I know it's a Thursday night. You got stuff to do, maybe work tomorrow, but I think this was a good exercise. Plenty of other players out there. I'm sure that people need us to sell them on. So if you have any out there and you're listening, feel free to tweet at either of us or at the Fantrax account on the episode here of The Fly. Find us at The Fly FF Pod. Any closing statements? Any player that you felt you were sold on that you maybe weren't when you came into tonight? I'll start with you, Sean.
I'll go with Jonathan Taylor. I'm a lot more comfortable taking Jonathan Taylor in that situation I laid out. My top 4 guys are gone. 5th pick. Do I want to take Taylor or someone else? I think out of all the guys that I listed, I'm most comfortable now taking him in that situation that I laid out.
All right, Nick, how about you? Any of your guys you're sold on now?
Not to talk about the recent guy we just talked about, but I think Deebo is a guy I might take another look at for the rankings. I noted the lack of rushing. Elijah Mitchell was absent a lot of those weeks. I will say that. But
yes, I did forget that.
But I will say though, the yards after catch with any quarterback, the ability to do that, we've seen with Waddle, with Tyreek Hill, those sort of guys, it should raise his stock. So I'll take another look at Deebo for sure.
You got to find that video of him on the treadmill too. I know off-season videos.
I seen it. I wish I could do, half of that and not be injured for work the next day. But
tell you what, if you're not sold on him, try to do that and then tell me if you're sold on him. And
try to do that at 215 pounds as well.
True.
I wish.
So I appreciate you guys coming on here tonight. I would say I'm mostly sold on DeAndre Swift, but it's going to be very difficult, especially in my home leagues, to get him because I am from the Philadelphia area. And I think everyone knows I love DeAndre Swift, and he's now going to be in Midnight Green and Kelly Green this year for the Philadelphia Eagles. So that is exciting. Thanks again for everyone who tuned in here to the Fly Fantasy Football Podcast. It will be a recording. I know we were live tonight, but it will be wherever you can get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, and you can find us at the Fly FF Pod as well. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Nick. I'm Colin McTamany, and everybody else, take it easy.